Voting for Oscar nominations begins this week. On this episode, I talked to the directors behind 4 documentary contenders. I'm Tom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. This week, we teamed with The Ankler to bring you insights to these shortlisted films. Later in the episode, you'll hear from the directors of Yanuni, My Undesirable Friends, and Cutting Through Rocks. First, we're going to start with The Alabama Solution and its 2 directors, Andrew Jarecki and Charlotte Kauffman. The film takes us inside an Alabama prison using cell phone footage shot by prisoners and smuggled out to show conditions that are normally hidden. The film is streaming on HBO. I asked Andrew about the title, The Alabama Solution, and what it means.
Well, there's a refrain that we've heard coming out of Alabama a lot, which is that they sort of recognize this problem exists in their prison system. They just don't want any outsiders to give them advice or fixes. They believe that the problem requires an Alabama solution. We see this as an Alabama problem, requires an Alabama solution. But what we learned very quickly by going into Alabama and spending 6 years there is that this is the solution that they've chosen. You know, they have all the resources. They can make a decision about what their prison system ought to be like. They've chosen this. So when we say the Alabama solution is what's happening, it's not that we're waiting for a solution. They've shown their colors. They've said, look, this is the best we can do. And obviously it's a very disturbing situation if that's what they consider to be the best they can do.
So, Charlotte, prisons get explored in a lot of fiction TV series and a lot of documentaries. What were you trying to do differently in this?
Well, I think that historically, most journalism and storytelling that has been done around prisons has been done with the oversight and permission of the state. Journalists cannot speak to people who are incarcerated. They cannot visit prisons historically unless they have the permission of the state. That is something that has been affirmed by and backed up by Supreme Court rulings and has meant that a lot of the storytelling around prisons is not truly free expression of journalism. It is something that has been mediated and moderated by state authorities. And the fact that we were able to communicate with men who are incarcerated through contraband cell phones meant that we were able to circumvent that. And in some ways, you can consider our film one of the first truly free journalism about the prison system, that we're able to see inside the prison system, not because we were granted permission by the authorities, but because we had this other way in. And so I think that's what is very unique about our film, is that we are seeing the truth about what incarceration is without the permission of the state.
So, Andrew, you're undertaking this project over several years, receiving whistleblower footage from inside prison. Can you? Much of this footage that you receive is extremely harrowing and disturbing. So, how are you reacting to what you received, and in the course of building out this long-term project, but probably also feeling on a regular basis like something's got to be done?
Well, there was so much material, and it came not just from people who were incarcerated, but also from the investigation that we did. And we had terabytes and terabytes of information that we had filmed over we had gotten there 7 years ago and really started filming in earnest not that long after that. And so there was so much to assemble that the biggest challenge in some ways was to figure out how to weave the story together. Because when you look at a problem that's as intractable as incarceration or crime and punishment, you have so many elements of it that you would like to talk about. It's critical to talk about the slave labor. Without it, you don't understand what's the big economic engine that's driving this. But then again, they're building $3 billion worth of new prisons. How does that fit into it? Then again, there's the fact that they're not paroling people. Well, that's its own story. Or the fact that the politicians are weaponizing groups of victims and telling them that, 50-year prison sentences that's the only thing that's going to satisfy them. Every one of these things could be a film. And so for us, I think it was this feeling that if we don't give enough of the story, people will walk away saying, I don't get it. Why does this happen? I guess I don't have a voice here. It's too complicated for me. So as a regular person, I might as well just move on. And our feeling was that if we could weave it into a really compelling story, if it felt like a film with momentum, people would be engaged. And if we had characters that were as compelling as these men clearly were when we met them, then you would have a film, and the film would help drive everything else. If we care about changing the system in Alabama and more generally in the US, and we want the film to be helpful, the film has to work as a film. So that was a big driver for us.
I think one of the things that when people see the film that is so shocking to them is the visual evidence of abuse, of unconstitutional conditions that the men were able to film on the contraband cell phones. And we had so much of that visual evidence, but we couldn't just solely make a film about that, because there is so much more to the experience of incarceration in America. And, the secrecy that surrounds all prisons in America, it's hiding not just the abuse, but it's also hiding the humanity and the leadership and these incredible people. And so I think in our various iterations of editing and weaving the story together, it could have been very easy to just focus on the abuse and the horrors and the trauma that comes out of the prison system because it's so urgent and it's so important. But we also wanted to make sure that we gave as much focus to the humanity and the journey of people who live inside these systems for decades. So I think a big part of it was finding that balance.
I mean, Andrew, in American politics, getting tough on crime has always been a reliable vote getter. So, I think some people may not care about prison reform because they think of prisoners as violent offenders. And based on what you've documented, what's the case you would make for average people to care more about this?
Well, I think people bring such different sorts of baggage to this kind of a subject, and everybody, because it's so polarizing, people say, well, I'm a tough on crime person, and therefore the other people are easy on crime people. I think we're all tough on crime people, theoretically. Like, we care about not having crime. We care about having a just society. We care about not having a lack of safety in our communities. So we all sort of do want the same thing. And I think that it's very easy for politicians to rile people up. And invariably they say very polarizing things. Well, we've already let out all of the nonviolent offenders, so everyone that's in prison is to be feared. And there's no question that there are Jeffrey Dahmers in the world and people who are probably, psychiatrically problematic in other ways. And I don't think anybody's arguing that, you should open up the prisons and the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world should walk out. But a huge percentage of the people who are in prison are in there for relatively minor things, property crimes, nonviolent crimes. In places like Alabama, one of the ways that they've been able to keep their prison population so large and frankly so profitable for them in terms of free labor and all the things they get is by sort of scaring the population and saying everybody's violent. And then when you look at the definition of violence, you find out that, somebody could go to prison for, as you see in the film, entering an unoccupied building. And so suddenly in Alabama, you have, I think, 54 different crimes that are all considered violent, but almost none of them include somebody getting shot or somebody getting killed. So it's a process, and I think the film can help with this, of opening our minds to the question of whether we should be locking people away in institutions where they're so traumatized, where crimes are being committed every day in these institutions, and then hoping that we're going to release them because 95% of these people are getting back out of prison, and somehow they're going to get a bus ticket and $50 and be able to rejoin society. So it's not really working for anyone. It's not really making us safer, but it's an easy thing to say in an election that, like, well, I'm here, I'm tough on crime, and my opponent's not tough on crime. And I just think it's a false narrative.
I want to ask you about what's been happening with the film since it came out. I interviewed you in October, just a week after the film went on HBO, and what's been taking place now that the film is out in the world?
Well, there's been a big groundswell of support, I think, and interest in the film, because even the people of Alabama don't really have a sense of what's happening in their own prison system because of the secrecy. And so when people are faced with this kind of video proof and understand the level of corruption, not just brutality, but corruption, understand, Charlotte said to me the other day that the Alabama Department of Corrections is the largest law enforcement agency in the state, and it is the most significant drug dealing operation in the state. The drugs are being brought in by law enforcement officers. That's how it happens. And so it's a very topsy-turvy world where people have been, little by little, have become accepting of this. And there's probably a little shame in it that if you have a family member who's in prison, you probably don't talk about it. But when they see the film, they realize that this is also happening to their neighbor. This is also happening to a family down the street. And so there's I think, a real feeling of sort of the opportunity to cooperate in saying what's wrong and saying this is destroying our family. It's destroying many families. So you see people now for the first time showing up at the prison oversight committee meetings with signs and pictures of the governor and saying, like, this is a real huge problem. And I think the most encouraging thing that we saw recently was, number one, that people inside the prison have prisons, the 14 prisons, people inside the 14 prisons have all seen the film. And the way that they've seen the film is some of them are getting it on a contraband cell phone. Some of them are getting it sent to them by somebody. Where there's a will, there's a way. We got a video the other day of some men inside one of the facilities watching the film, guys in wheelchairs and people crowding around a television that was kind of like a makeshift, setup where they had figured out, because there are no guards there, how to show the film. And that togetherness and putting those people together with their own families who are seeing for the first time what their loved ones are experiencing is resulting in, like, real action on the ground. And people are starting to show up at these legislative sessions and starting to make real noise about it. And we want to help them do that. And we want to help bring the film out there. That's why we've been doing dozens of screenings around Alabama, even for people who don't have HBO or for people who wouldn't necessarily see something like this.
And I think also, the crisis that is depicted in our film is ongoing and it is urgent. And the people who you meet in our film that are fighting this crisis are continuing to fight. Like, the story, our film came out, but their story is ongoing. And they have announced recently that they're going back on strike, that they're planning to go back on a work strike. And I think that, they have said that because of the film, that they no longer have to explain why they're doing this. They can just focus on what they think the solutions are. And I would also want to mention that we have been receiving a really urgent and energetic response from other states, because the Alabama solution is really not just Alabama. It's an American problem. And the Department of Justice under this administration has essentially withdrawn from pursuing investigations into unconstitutional conditions in prisons and jails across America. And they have withdrawn from enforcing constitutional rights of incarcerated people. They have dismantled the civil rights, the civil litigation division of the Department of Justice, who is responsible for that activity. And a lot of states are feeling abandoned. And so I think we have seen a lot people in other states really wanting to organize screenings, to promote the film, to start a conversation across the country about the importance of transparency and accountability and oversight in prisons across the nation. And it's unfortunately, it is more urgent a conversation now than it was when we started making this film.
That was Charlotte Kauffman and Andrew Jarecki on their documentary, The Alabama Solution. Our next film is Yanuni, directed by Richard Ladkani. He profiles an indigenous activist named Juma, who was the first woman leader of her community in the Amazon. When the film begins, she's opposing the policies of Brazil's right-wing government under Bolsonaro. Then leadership changes. When the left-wing president Lula is elected, Juma is invited to work inside the government. The film also follows her husband Hugo, who works for the Brazilian military to fight cartels in the Amazon. Here's our conversation.
Richard, you've made other films on environmental issues, including The Ivory Game and Sea of Shadows. I'm interested in how those films prepared you for Yanuni and what you were trying to do new in Yanuni.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you look at The Ivory Game and Sea of Shadows, they're more topical films. I really looked at the issue of the elephants being poached for their ivory, or in Sea of Shadows about the destruction of an ecosystem. And I looked at it from all sides. And with Yanuni, I wanted to try something new, something more personal, by telling the story through this unique woman, Juma Shipaya, that I found was an indigenous leader, and to really focus the narrative through her and not present so many characters and look at it from the journalistic side and from the NGO side and from that side, but just follow a great narrative of an unfolding story of the life of this woman, which was constantly in crisis, and just try to tell the story of the Amazon and what's happening there through her eyes and through her own personal resistance fight. So that's, I think, was the biggest new approach to this film.
So Juma was first woman leader of her indigenous community in the Amazon. When we meet her, she's an activist. Her life is constantly in danger. And then over the course of the film, we see her get brought into the government of under Lula to take a government position. She still lives with constant death threats. She had to live briefly in exile. And she has every reason to be distrustful of outsiders. So how did you form a bond with her?
Well, you see, the moment I met her, she had just survived the 6th attempt on her life. And she was basically in hiding. And she was not interested in talking to journalists or filmmakers or outsiders or anyone, because she just wanted to survive and live a life where she can, have a family and be with her kids. But when I approached her, I made her a proposition. I said, look, I know many indigenous leaders like you are being targeted, and many are killed and just disappear, and no one will ever notice. And I thought this film could really make a difference in your life. It could be an opportunity, like a new tool in your fight of resistance to bring meaningful change. Because if millions of people know who you are, you will become a much harder target to take out, because there will be outrage, there will be a media storm, there will be, questions and answers. And I said, see it as a new tool in your tool set, basically, to fight the resistance. And also, I want to give you as much control as possible, because I quickly realized that she's a storyteller and she really understands narrative structure. You see it when she speaks on stages to people. She mesmerizes them. She really gets their attention and they follow every word she says because she understands the 3-act structure and she understands how to have an impact. So I said, I want you to be the storyteller. I want you to be in control. I asked her to be a producer on the film, to give her also meaningful control over the narrative, because a big question was security. Like I didn't want her to feel in any way threatened by this film or exposing too much. I said, this is your life we're dealing with. You have already survived 6 times when they try to kill you. So this should be a better experience and it should be an opportunity. So she found it very intriguing and interesting. And she was, she was like intrigued to say, okay, I think we can try this. This could be something new and a new opportunity. And the one thing I had to do is I had to learn Portuguese because she didn't even trust the translator that I used because the translator was a security threat. He's like, how do I know that this person is not going to give away all the information that, this person is translating to you? So I took a 6 months course in Portuguese and learned Portuguese so that I didn't need a translator and I could be fully embedded into her life.
That's amazing. So the other major character in this is her husband, Hugo, who works in the Brazilian military. We see him conducting raids on cartels in the Amazon. And I've heard you say that when you first started this project, first started filming with Juma, you didn't even know that much about her husband or what he did. So talk about how he became a big part of this story.
Well, it's sort of, it came quite naturally. When I first met him is the scene you see in the film where she picks him up from the airport. And because everything is about risk and mitigation of risk, she didn't tell me much about him because she didn't know if he wanted me to know anything about him. So I was just intrigued. I saw this guy arrive with a big gun in his suitcase, and I was like, he must be government. He must be a good guy, but I wasn't sure, like, who does he work for? Is he security, private security? But then I understand, that he's actually this big environmental fighter for the government that goes after criminals in the Amazon, the people that threaten Juma's life and the life of her people. So he became this opportunity through her story, because he's her husband, to actually go to the front lines of defense, of where the war is taking place. Juma can never go there because they would just kill her on sight. She's an indigenous woman, a leader. They just take them out because they could be spying on them. They could be doing, just causing trouble. But when Hugo gets there with his government helicopters, an elite force of soldiers, then they usually run away. And I was so intrigued to show the devastation firsthand so that our audiences could feel what it is like to destroy the Amazon, what it looks like to poison the rivers with mercury, to dig up all the sludge from the rivers and really destroy the ecosystem. So he was this opportunity, but it was a huge challenge as well to go with him, because I took the seat of a soldier. I'm not trained in combat or in like hostile environments like that. And basically, it was also a problem for them because I was taking the place of a soldier. So their security was down 1 man. They're usually 10-man team. And I was taking the 10th seat, so to say. So they only had 9 people to do the same mission. I wasn't allowed to take anyone with me. And I went on 4 such missions that were each 2 weeks long into the forest, surviving, sleeping, everything in the forest, no support. But I needed to tell the story, so I went for it. But it was quite a big challenge to do it.
Wow, that's even more harrowing than what I saw in the film, which is pretty harrowing in itself. So you're in a number of dangerous situations, not only with Hugo on these raids, but even with Juma in situations of protest and the threat of violence. I mean, can you take us into side of one of these moments and explain how you handled the danger yourself while still keeping the mentality to capture it as a filmmaker?
There is the physical violence that you see also partly in the film, the tear gases or the guns and the blazing ships and these and that. But I think the biggest danger for me throughout the production was to not to not cause any unwanted attention towards the family and the subjects themselves. Because here I was with a camera running around in one of the most dangerous places of the Amazon, like Altamira, where people get shot and killed every day on the streets. There's street violence, there's gang violence. And I needed to mitigate the risk to them much more than the risk to my own life. So it was basically, how do I become invisible in this production so that people don't start talking across town and then start coming after them before she speaks too much to this filmmaker. We need to shut her down. We need to kill her before she's famous, before she gets out there, right? So that was my biggest risk, is like, how do we approach this production so that everyone stays safe? So we had a real great security team around us all the time, who are Brazilian, very experienced people that work with indigenous people and that run these safe houses for indigenous people who are under duress or threatened. And they constantly gave us advice on how to move, what to do. So for example, even in public, if you use your camera, make it as small and professional as possible. So I learned to shoot with a very small DSLR camera, not even with a top mic or anything, just to look like maybe a YouTuber or someone, that doesn't cause a lot of attention. Maybe just a photographer that people, I used hidden mics on them. We would never go with a boom person or a crew. So a lot of this film was shot very kind of invisible, like under the radar, from cars, using small cameras. And sometimes we were, though, they found out about us, and there's a moment in the scene where they were targeted in a protest. They were circled, and in WhatsApp groups their picture was being sent around, and it said, what to do, guys. It wasn't me they were circling, it was her security or her bodyguard or things like that. So I was always afraid that something would happen during production because of the production. I think there were dangerous moments for me as well, but overall, because this film was shot over 4 or 5 years, it was basically, how do we keep this film as quiet, as inconspicuous as possible, so no one would notice. We didn't do social media, we didn't do talking publicly about it. We stayed hidden, and I think this was the biggest challenge. And fortunately, everything went well. Nobody noticed what we were doing until now, of course. And now we're blowing this film up as much as we can, so that fame basically protects her. It becomes a shield. Juma was just on the cover of Elle magazine in Brazil, for example. That never happened before. Like big news outlets have been interviewing her. DiCaprio, who's one of our producers, posed with her purposely to mark the ground, basically saying she is now a recognized public figure. Do not harm her. So this is going on in the background, right? Where we are like trying to really work the film with this whole strategic plan of getting it as big as possible, while at the same time, actually doing it for her people, for meaningful change, for impact in the territories.
With the little bit of time I have left, I want to go back and ask you about how you collaborated with Juma as a storyteller. Was that taking place over the course of the 4 years of filmmaking? Or, how much was that happening in the edit room? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, great question. Look, from the beginning, I said, you are the storyteller and let's do this together. So we were constantly in a collaborative relationship where everything was discussed, and she would take it to her community, describe the ideas we had, and then come back to me. It was always the collective that was working behind the scenes. But as the film progressed, the editing was collaborative. So I spent part of my time editing this film in Brazil with her, so she could see how the story is coming together. We showed the very first time ever that anyone saw the film. It was a screening in her territory in Carima to her people. I was linked via Zoom, to like a big screen. They watched the movie with popcorn and kashiri, which is a local beer that they made, and they all gave feedback. Juma was there, and we took all these notes into the process and constantly made sure that she's happy with how they're portrayed, like that it's real, that it's like actually the fight not only of her existence but of that of her people. That was so important for her, that it's not about Juma, it's about her people, and it's representative of the people's struggle. So that was a balance we always needed to make sure she's happy with. She didn't want the attention too much on her, even though it was about her, but it needed to be reflective. And so, she came to Vienna for post-production, for grading, for the soundtrack of the film, for some sound recordings we did, So it was always like a back and forth. And I tried really to make the film that she wanted to make, that I told her in the beginning, let me help you tell your story. I'm just going to facilitate with all my skills that you can tell your story to the world. And I wanted to be this film that she called Yanuni must be from the territory to the world, and I am just going to help you make that happen. But you will be the person leading the ship, And to this day, she's very happy. She's presenting the film around the world. It's going to be her fourth time now coming to the U.S. in the coming, now this January for more screenings with Hugo together. The whole indigenous movement is behind it because we took it slow. We took it, with the advice of the community, and they see it as their indigenous film that has made it out there to the world to tell their story, and they're super proud. And Juma is super proud because this is her film.
That was Richard Ladkani discussing Yanuni. Our third film is My Undesirable Friends. It's subtitled Part 1, Last Air in Moscow. The Russian-American director Julia Loktev traveled to Moscow in the fall of 2021 to document Putin's crackdown on journalists. A few months later in February, Russia invaded Ukraine, and within days, all the journalists that Julia was following were forced into exile. The project became something bigger than the feature-length doc she originally planned. The current version runs nearly 5.5 hours, broken into chapters. She calls this section Part 1, and it concludes on the night the journalists leave Russia. Julia is now preparing Part 2 that will cover their lives in exile. Let's hear our conversation.
So, Julia, over the past 30 years, you've made both documentaries and fiction. What was driving you to go to Russia in the fall of 2021?
It really happened so incredibly quickly. I read an article about young journalists being named foreign agents, and it had just started happening. And basically, pretty much as soon as I could get a visa, I jumped on a plane and started making the film, because I thought when journalists and when members of civil society have to mark themselves as being other, as not belonging to the society, something really dangerous is happening.
So I've read you saying in interviews that when you first went, you were imagining it was be kind of a research trip, and that you'd eventually, get a professional camera person. But when you got there, you realized, to get access to this world, you needed to do it yourself. And you get there in October 2021. Things are already tense, but a few months later, Russia escalates its war in Ukraine, and things become super tense. When did you realize this was going to be a longer project than just a feature-length film?
I think the answer to that is pretty clear the morning that Putin invaded Ukraine. And I realized that this was clearly a momentous, historic moment. It's the biggest war we've seen in Europe since World War II. It's something completely unimaginable. And nobody could imagine that that was going to happen until it actually happened. So when I started filming, all the journalists I was filming were expecting a crackdown. And they thought this is going to get worse and worse, and people kept talking it's going to get worse. But I think everybody thought the monster would eat them, not invade the neighboring country.
So in Russia around this time, journalists were under threat of being arrested. There were assassinations of journalists taking place in the backdrop. And we see on camera how the journalists that you're filming are processing those risks for themselves. But you, as a visiting Russian American filmmaker, were exposed to some of your own risks. And I wonder how you were processing that for yourself.
I think I just tried not to think about it, really. Like, I was aware, obviously, there were risks, especially during the first week of the full scale invasion. I was constantly thinking, you know, at that point, I was really starting to think very much like a filmmaker. All I could think about is, I can't lose the footage. I can't lose the footage. How do I get this footage out? How do I not get I was filming with an iPhone, but I also had microphones. How do I not get my equipment seized? How do I not get my footage seized? That I don't even remember thinking, I just thought, like, yes, things can happen. But for me, it was the consequences. Like, if I get detained, I can't film. I can't keep doing my job. And I knew that every moment counted, and this was such a momentous historic event that I had to keep filming. So I just tried not to think about it. I tried not to. There were certain things I didn't do, like I didn't go to, because I didn't have press accreditation. So I really couldn't have been filming in like a public space, like a protest. So I had characters film the protest because they were going anyways to protest. But the place that I felt most threatened, actually, was the place they went every day, their workplace, because all of these characters, their offices had been bugged. They were constantly living in fear of a search. And I thought, they go to work here every single day and they just do their job. So I just got to shut up and film
it. When I look at your film career, I don't see other projects you've done with this degree of intensity. I mean, you don't have a career as an investigative journalist or putting yourself at risk. As far as I know, was this something very new to you?
Well, I think in a way it's really connected to all my other films. Ultimately, all my films are about people going and the emotions of people going through pretty extreme circumstances usually, but also kind of mixed with humor, mixed with just the details of daily life, of what it feels like to go through a horrific or terrible event. And in that way, I think it actually does have a lot in common. And I also am very focused on characters, on faces, on emotions. And that's how it's told. It's not like, it's about some investigative journalism, but it itself is not a piece of investigative journalism. I feel like it's, in a way, the way I'd made the film is closer to fiction than it is to journalism.
You're doing many of the things yourself: directing, producing, you're the camera person, you're the sound recordist, you're translating. For the editing, you're doing it in partnership with Michael Taylor. And I want to ask you more about the editing because it's paced with a sense of urgency, an urgency that reflects the people that we see on screen. You're often filming a scene that unfolds over several hours, then compressing it into minutes of screen time. So I'd love to hear more about how you found the rhythm to editing the film.
Yeah, and you're right. This is a film that was made largely for most of its time with three people. I was a one-person crew. I co-edited it with Michael Taylor, and then we had an online editor, assistant editor, kind of tech guru, and that's it. That's our crew. It's like three people working on it for, many years now. And the editing, for me, it's distillation. It's how do you let the footage speak to you? So, you have to just kind of whittle it down. It's almost like carving. I'm mixing all my metaphors: carving, distillation, completely mixed metaphors. But it's basically, you take away, the extra, and then you can see it better. And then you take away more and you can see it better, and keep going until you have this distilled scene. Let's say, I've had people describe it as a hangout movie. So you might have like a 5-hour hangout, like dinner, with people talking about everything happening politically in their lives and jokes. And then we work and work and work until it's like, 1 hour, then it's 20 minutes. And then it ends up being like a 6-minute scene that is like the essence of that 6-hour dinner.
Yeah, I mean, I should convey to people who haven't seen it yet, there's a lot of humor in the film, a lot of dark humor in the film. It may be a hangout film, but it's hanging out with people who are going through something very intense and who wear their idealism and their principles on their outer skin, not buried. I mean, it must have been thrilling in a way to be with people who are living so close to their principles.
Absolutely. I feel like I've had this immense privilege to have spent, and now it's been several years because I'm making a second kind of follow up of Exile, to have spent this time with these characters whom I love. They're funny, they're idealistic, they're incredibly opinionated, they're incredibly committed to their work, incredibly sharp. And I just feel like, wow, how lucky am I that I got to spend time with them and film them. And that just feels like a privilege. And I feel like they inspire me all the time.
So this portion of the film, this nearly 5.5 hour portion of the film, is called Part 1. It ends in early March 2022 as these journalists are fleeing really overnight into exile. As you said, you've been filming them. That's the end of this section, but you're planning a part 2 that is following them over these years in exile. How have you been managing that to keep on filming and yet building this first part to release?
It feels I think like everything about the process feels very organic, and obviously surprising, unexpected. When I started making the film, I obviously had no idea that, a few months later, all of these characters would be facing the decision of, do we go to work tomorrow, do we go to prison, or do we go to the airport right now with a carry-on suitcase, which is a pretty tremendous thing to happen in your life. And then I kept following them. Like 2 days later, part 2 starts 2 days later as they're in Istanbul. They have no idea what country they're going to. Their bank cards don't work. They have no media. Their country has just started a war, which they're incredibly ashamed of and horrified by. They feel like they should report on it, but they don't have any media because all their media have been closed. And how do you get back up on your feet? And I feel like I just had the tremendous, as a human, I feel it's incredibly unlucky to have lived through this. But as a director, I had this tremendous luck to capture this live, because obviously different populations historically have fled suddenly into exile. And just that I got to capture this process live, all because we started filming when the alarms went off in our heads, when people were starting to be forced to mark themselves as not belonging to the society. And we kind of, with my co-director, Anna Nyemzer, who's the lead character at the beginning, we said, something's happening here. This is up to no good,
I mean, I have to say that having watched the first part, I'm anticipating the next section as much as some people anticipate the new season of Stranger Things. I have a real feeling for these the people that you filmed, and I want to see what happens to them next. And so we can be expecting that sometime in 2026.
Yeah, pretty soon. I am editing the last chapter now, and I'm having a little bit of separation anxiety because, in a way, I also don't want to let go of filming these characters, because for me, it is very much a character-based film about people that I've come to know and love, and hopefully the viewer does too, and feels that they've become your friends in a way through the film. But yeah, it's coming along, although we have said that maybe, if things ever change in Russia, and if we're not holding our breaths, but if Putin dies, we may go back for part 3, but we may be very, very old by then.
The film has been winning awards. It's been gaining a lot of critical acclaim. It's now shortlisted for the Oscars. What does it mean in Russia for this film to be getting that attention?
I don't know, actually, if it's kind of how much, it's very hard to understand what anything means in Russia because, of course, you can't do sociology in an authoritarian country. So it's very hard to kind of give any answers about Russia. This is very much a film about the people who left, which is pretty much most of Russian civil society, most journalists, and all the people who were hoping to create a different kind of Russia and who continue to work in exile to create a different kind of Russia, a Russia that does not invade its neighboring countries, Russia with respect for human rights. And that's the kind of Russia they all wanted. I mean, every one of my characters, I think, would love to see the people responsible for this war, tried for war crimes and a different kind of Russia emerge. But obviously, nobody's holding their breath. But at the same time, people keep working for it. I think that's what I am so impressed by with the characters and with all the people I filmed is that it's not necessarily about whether you get to the goal. It's about, do you keep working and did you do the right thing when you could?
As I wrap this up, I want to ask about the parallels of this story to other parts of the world, including the United States. So this is an important story to tell, just to understand what's happening in Russia. But watching it, I couldn't help but feel echoes of a slowly eroding sense of freedoms that happen elsewhere. And I wonder how you think about that.
Oh, I wish it wasn't so relevant in other places. I wish this was a film about one isolated place with authoritarianism that had no relevance at all to other countries. But unfortunately, it is something that is becoming increasingly relevant in so many places, and obviously here in the US. That's just the world changing around the film, and I think that's something that a lot of people have said to me. I hope it can be useful in some ways. I mean, a lot of people have said to me it's helped them deal with the current moment or have a way of thinking about the current moment we're in the US. And, it's nice to feel a little bit useful in this moment as I'm losing my mind. It's nice to feel that there's something, that maybe helped one person, maybe helped, to think about it. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's all too relevant.
That was Julia Loktev discussing My Undesirable Friends Part 1, last air in Moscow. Our final film is Cutting Through Rocks, directed by Sara Khaki and Mohammedreza Eyni. They based themselves in an Iranian village to profile a woman named Sara, who challenges the local patriarchy. She's well known as a midwife, and that propels her to win a seat on the town council. She uses that position to encourage girls to get an education and think independently. She even teaches them to ride her motorcycle. We follow her over several years as she pushes boundaries and experiences a backlash. Here's my conversation with the directors.
So, Sara, let me start with you. You and Mohammedreza both come from Iran, and you currently live in the United States. And I believe that this project got started because you had read about the main participant, Sara Shaverdi. And what drew you in about her story?
Thank you for having us, Tom. Basically, yes, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Tehran, Iran, and I left Iran when I was a teenager. But I kind of grew up witnessing so many women who were striving for independence in my surrounding, in my immediate family and extended family, and so on. So, and also when I moved to the United States, I kind of had this idea that a lot of the ideas that are now explored in Cutting Through Rocks, mainly the gender injustice, is really a work in progress, even in the United States. So those ideas sort of brought me to explore and figure out about the women who never left their home countries or home cities. What are they doing and how are they pushing for space for the women and girls around them? And through extensive research, I actually came to find Sara Shahverdi, a tenacious individual who rides a motorcycle, who is the only female motorcycle rider and had been a midwife and delivered 400 kids in her village. And when I started phone conversation with her over several months, she shared with me that she's thinking about running for a council seat. And I knew that there was a story here. And I also knew that I wouldn't have been able to tell it on my own. I needed a male co creator who's happened to be a great cinematographer as well. So I called Mohammedreza and I said, let's go to this village together. This is a story worth telling.
Yeah, and yeah, and as you know, Tom, I'm coming from the region, not the
Mhm.
village, but Azeri speaking community. So I witnessed a lot of stories, especially about women and teenage girls, as you saw in the film. And I was waiting for a moment to make a film about it. But for me, as a male director, to go to the community and make an intimate film was not possible. So I also needed Sara as a female director to go enter the village together and cover the story of women in an intimate way.
This is a kind of a story that we wouldn't have been able to tell it on our own. We needed each other as a male female collaborators to be making the film that we are making. In some ways, we are accessing, we are getting to know the women in the community and as well as the men in the community. So we needed each other to be able to have the access that we needed to tell the story.
But we didn't expect that we are going to spend 7 years in the village uh, telling this story. And each time, Tom, we stayed in the village for 90 days or 50 days or 70 days. It was 8 sessions of filming because we wanted to see, to make it tangible for audience, the evolution that our main character Sara Shahverdi is going to offer to people in the village. So that way, for both of us, was necessary and important to stay in the village and be patient with our story.
And I should clarify, you started out this project as professional collaborators, and over the course became a personal couple. You're married now, Mohammedreza. You talked a little bit about that the last time I interviewed you on my podcast. I won't go into that again, but I do want to ask you about the ups and downs that you covered over the years in the life of Sara Shaverdi. And let me focus on a period that feels very hopeful. She runs for office, kind of unprecedented for a woman in this village, and she wins. And we see in the film, a lot of support. We see men stopping her in the street saying, I voted for you, and it feels like there's this momentum. Now that changes later on, but I want to ask how you experienced that moment of when she was on this upswing of kind of optimism.
So for us, knowing the fact that she had been a midwife, Sara already had been a midwife and had delivered 400 kids was really crucial because the kids she delivered were now 18-year-old first-time voters, and I would say she was able to receive the majority of her votes, through the teenage boys and girls who she had delivered, and also some of the men who are her fans used to be her classmates. Also, her opponents used to be classmates as well. So I think that there was a momentum, that idea of this woman is running for office, although she's the first ever to run for office in this region. So it kind of started out that way, and the I would say some of the backlashes started after she got the power, and there's a lot of play of power in this film that we witness.
And also for us as filmmakers, it was a lesson to learn, to see how change is contagious, to see that how it's possible. Even it's hard, it's sometimes it seems that it's impossible, but if you fight for it, you can make it possible. And our main character and her community taught us a lot of things while making this film. And this film was for us was a long master class of studying power and how power works. To see that a woman for the first time taking a council seat, taking the power, and how the community is responding to her power. So and I shared with you that when we finished the first phase of Sara winning the election, one of our colleagues told us that, guys, you have a film here. You don't need to continue. But for both of us, it was very important to see how she uses the power and how others in the village reacting to Sarah's power. And we see in the process that Sara using the power to fight for women rights and asking men to give the land rights to them,
Mhm.
teaching teenage girls how to ride a motorcycle and stopping childbirth marriage. Many, many different things. Using power to empower women in the village. Yeah.
So let me ask about that backlash, because we do see some men stepping up and challenging Sarah in different ways, and I wonder how that was for you as filmmakers. I mean, you spent a lot of time in this village, but you're still outsiders. I can imagine in a small place where everyone knows everyone else. I mean, as there you kind of feel a certain level of intimidation against Sara, and I wonder how you were experiencing that as filmmakers.
So the moment we walked into this village, there were questions about who we are and what our intentions are. But the more we stayed, as soon as Mohammedreza started speaking the language, then the guards fell down. Then they were like, "Oh, this he is from us and he belongs to us and our community." And also the fact that I was a woman also helped with the female community as well. Um, but so it wasn't really so much about our presence, because the more we stayed, the more, and with a lot of patience that we had as the events unfolded, then they really didn't feel the presence of the camera for the most part, especially when it comes to um, some of the family dispute that happened within Sarah Shahverdi's family, or outside in the village, with some of the opponents. They kind of knew that we are actually following Sarah Shahverdi's story, but the men in the village were happy to share their point of view with us, because they were saying that this is our chance to have our voices heard, to kind of voice out our opinion. So, in terms of being able to portray two different points of views, that was we were in a privileged position, in an unbiased position, to be able to listen to different perspectives. However, as the story progressed, we did also face a lot of ups and downs as well, because there were a lot of times where we weren't sure if we could ever finish the film, the production process. Sometimes we felt that we were kind of we were staying in Tehran and visiting the village every once in a while. So in between our production trips, there were sometimes questions in terms of, are we going to able to finish filming? And also in terms of the access that we were trying to receive. Sometimes when we wanted to film some places like the court or a school, we had to wait for 4 or 5 months before we actually get access to filming. And once we did, we only had half hour, 40 minutes, or 1 hour to film everything. And in terms of the court scene, I remember that when once we did have the access and we were able to go, there was a line of people outside, and there was somebody waiting to see what we were capturing, and the time was so short, so we were able to only start the filming process from behind the judge so that we could see Farish, this young girl's face as she's telling her
It's
story.
only two angles. If you see that scene, it's only two angles because we didn't have time. And actually, 10 people worked on this permission to get this permission.
Mhm.
I was not
Uh,
sure that we were going to get that for our film, and it was very necessary for our story because it was telling the story of many other women and teenage girls in the village. Because the process of a divorce is too long. It's
Mhm.
sometimes 20 or 30 sessions of going and coming and seeing what is the result. So we wanted to see that. We wanted to see that how hard it is for teenage girls, young women there, even when they want to get divorced, it's like tough. It's like crazy, the process.
Mhm.
Before this project, each of you had done filming of other things. This is a major undertaking, unlike anything you had done before. It's been 7 or 8 years of your life, and how does it feel at this moment to have this film finally out in the world? To have given up these 7 or 8 years of your life in the making of it.
I'm so happy. I'm so proud because now film being out and getting the reaction from people all around the world, we feel that connection. And when we were working on the film, as Sara said, many times we are not sure we are going to finish the film. I can say we spend a lot of time behind the camera to make this happen, more than the filming itself, because it was not an easy film to make. And now being out and seeing the reactions, even Iranian women, we made this film, and now we know that it's a global story. But seeing the reaction of Iranian women in different countries that we had the chance to screen the film, getting emotional, they just crying and saying that we can see ourselves on biggest screen now. This is our story. And even we are getting a lot of messages from people, even from Europe, from Copenhagen, from Berlin, from China, from United States, saying that Sara Shahverdi is our new role model. So for us, of course, this is payoff to see that the story is connecting to people. So to see that this connection is the most important thing that we can experience.
I agree with you, Mohammedreza, and also I think I'm very humbled to see the effect that this film had on a universal level, but also internally within the village too. I'm glad that we had the patience that we did, and we were able to witness this person from a moment where she was alone and the only female motorcycle rider, for example, to all the way to now recently where we heard it's very common. It's such a normal thing now for women to ride motorcycles. And this is one of the many examples that we are really happy to be able to witness the change and the evolution that happened within this one small part of the planet. And we kind of would love to see how it kind of replicates and the change happens over time.
That was Sara Khaki and Mohammedreza Eyni on their film Cutting Through Rocks. I want to thank them and all our guests for sharing their insights with me. And thanks to our partners at The Ankler, executive producer Jen Lasky, producer Keith Zanardi, and video editor Sebastian Doty. Thanks to our podcast team, Doc Voices writer Bella Racklin, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Rafaela Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.